This is lesson 22, the rich, the poor, and those in between. What did the emergence of urban industrial society mean for the rich and poor and those in between, especially those in between? College Board Topic 6.1 says contextualizing industrialization and its origins and effects. Explain the context in which industrialization originated, developed, and spread in Europe. We've been doing that one for a while. The experiences of everyday life were shaped by industrialization, depending on the level of industrial development in a particular location. Industrialization promoted the development of new classes in the industrial regions of Europe. Europe experienced rapid population growth and urbanization, leading to social dislocations. Over time, the Industrial Revolution altered the family structure and relations for bourgeois and working class families. College Board Topic 6.4, Side Effects of Industrialization. Explain the causes and consequences of social developments resulting from industrialization. In industrialized areas of Europe, i.e. Western and Northern Europe, socioeconomic changes created divisions of labor that led to the development of self-conscious classes, including the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Class identity developed and was reinforced through participation in philanthropic, political, and social associations among the middle classes and in mutual aid societies and trade unions among the working classes. College Board Topic 6.10, Causation in the Age of Industrialization. Explain the influence of innovations and technological developments in Europe from 1815 to 1914. Places: Great Britain, Germany, France. Time frame 1840 to 1914. You will find this lesson particularly interesting if you can see yourself emerging in these slides. The people depicted in this lesson are closer to us than anyone we've seen yet. And it is from them that we inherit, for better or worse, our most fundamental values and worldviews. Key concepts of rich, poor, and middle classes. You've got labor aristocracy and you've got sweated industries. From 1850 to 1914, there were big changes. The quality of life in the city improved because of what we talked about last time. Wages finally started to rise steadily after 70 years of industrial revolution, and they almost doubled from 1850 to 1914, and poverty was decreasing. Class structure became more complex. You had the rich, then you had lots of little middle classes and lots of little working classes. The aristocracy were still at the top. They had the wealth, they had the prestige, they had the political power, and they also had a new rich elite. And they were often successful in business, banking, large-scale commerce. The old aristocracy and the new rich elite often intermarried. We've seen this pattern before, haven't we? The old brought titles, big homes, and elegance to the marriage, and the new rich brought cash. The top 5% in 1900 got a third of the national income in Great Britain. The top 20% got 50 to 60% of the national income. The bottom 80% got about 40 to 50% of the national income. Taxes on the rich were low or even non-existent. Why the gap? Industrial and urban development made society more diverse and less unified, and this was not what Karl Marx thought was going to happen. Karl Marx thought that there would just be two classes, two kinds of people in the world, proletariats and bourgeoisie. That would be it. And he thought that they would be sharply defined and distinct from each other, and he thought that they would be in conflict with each other. But the reality was, industrialization and urbanization produced many social groups, primarily because of economic specialization. There were unlimited types of jobs, skills, and earnings. How do you describe the occupations of the middle classes at the beginning of the 20th century? Well, there was no single middle class. Instead, there were groups of middle classes. They did knowledge work rather than physical labor. These were jobs that required mental skills rather than physical skills. Examples were the moderately successful, smaller-scale industrialists, the merchants, doctors, lawyers, business professionals. Technology and industry were expanding rapidly. The demand for specialized knowledge expanded as well. Advanced education soared in importance, and expertise in certain professions became more prestigious. Engineers, architects, chemists, accountants, surveyors, government officials, managers, private executives. Industrialization expanded and diversified the lower middle classes also. Examples were mom and pop shopkeepers, small business people, traveling salesmen, bookkeepers, store managers, clerks. White collar employees, these were also lower middle class. They wore suits and ties, they had clean, uncalloused hands, they were relatively well educated, but they lacked complex skills, and as a group they strove to achieve two things: professional standing and higher social status. Examples of professions that rose into the middle classes: teachers, nurses, dentists. How do you describe the culture of the middle classes at the beginning of the 20th century? You look at their tastes. How you consume things creates class: food, clothes, housing, and behavior. And these things created separation between the middle classes and the working classes. And these tastes indicated a higher social standing than the working classes. How could you identify a middle class person? By what they consumed and how they spent their money. They ate well. 25% of their incomes were spent on food and drink. They ate meat at dinner. They hosted and attended dinner parties. They were a servant-keeping class. They hired cooks. They hired maids, maybe governesses for the kids. 25% of their income was spent on servants. They were well housed. Many actually rented. Many of their houses had small servants' quarters. Many had a summer house or a weekend house or a beach house. Outward appearances were important to them. They wore business suits. They paid attention to fashion. They owned a private coach or carriage. They spent their leisure time a certain way. They read books. They saw plays and operas. They listened to music. They traveled. They played a musical instrument. Codes of behavior. These are middle-class values. They stressed hard work. They stressed manners. They stressed personal achievement. They disavowed vices like drinking and gambling, etc. They believed that there was a clear right and wrong. And they believed that if you were poor, or if you had vices, or if you committed a crime, it was your own fault. They were receptive to Christian moral messages from ministers, from educators, from politicians. How do you describe the occupations of the working classes at the beginning of the 20th century? 4 out of 5 people in 1900 did physical labor. They didn't have any servants. They might own some farmland. They might even hire some farm hands. But fewer and fewer people worked in agriculture. In Great Britain, it was less than 8%. In Germany, about 25%. In France, it was higher, but not 50% anywhere. The working classes were also less unified and less homogeneous than the middle classes. For example, you had skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled labor. And even these had differing lifestyles and values. This diversity totally defied Karl Marx's predictions. Karl Marx taught that there were only 2 kinds of people in the world: workers and those who exploited workers. At the top of the working classes, you had what we might call the labor aristocracy. These were highly skilled working class people. They were about 15% of all the working classes. They earned about 2/3 of what the lower middle classes earned, and they earned twice as much as an unskilled laborer. Examples of the labor aristocracy: construction bosses, foremen, cabinet makers, jewelers, printers. Skills themselves were in a state of flux and precarious. Some skills were eliminated by the machines of the Industrial Revolution: clockmakers, furniture makers. But at the same time, other new skilled occupations were created by the machines: shipbuilders and train engineers. The labor aristocracy had similar values to the middle classes: work hard, save your money, get a better education for the kids, and they frowned upon vice, and they viewed themselves as models for the working classes below them. The semi-skilled workers. Some examples: carpenters, bricklayers, pipe fitters. Many of these were unmarried women. They were able to get enough training to enter this group. Then you had the unskilled workers. Examples of them: longshoremen, wagon drivers, helpers, street vendors, wage earners, owners of small markets. An interesting thing here is this: you could be self-employed at any level of skill or class. Domestic servants. In 1911, 1 out of 7 employed people were domestic servants in Great Britain. 1/3 of the girls in Great Britain were domestic servants. Many were recent migrants to the city from the country, and maids worked very hard, babysitting, shopping, cooking, cleaning, etc. And if there was a service staff, the maid was at the bottom of the pecking order. Sweated industries grew. These were similar to the putting out system. Women worked at home, they were paid by the piece, they got low wages, they had no job security. And so some examples of sweated industry were sewing, painting dishes, embroidery, laundry, ironing. How do you describe the culture of the lower classes at the beginning of the 20th century? Well, the biggest difference was drinking. Alcoholism was a huge problem in many working class homes. Cafes and pubs were popular meeting places. Political activities were often done in pubs. The Communist Manifesto had been written in a tavern in Brussels. Lower classes liked sporting events too. They liked to gamble on sporting events. They liked vaudeville and comedy theater. Their favorite comedy themes were drinking, premarital sex, marital problems, and of course, mothers-in-law. Church attendance actually declined during this time. People were moving to cities faster than churches were being built. And churches tend to defend conservatism and the status quo. And you don't want to go to church if the pastor is constantly praising the values and virtues of your political opponents, people you don't like and don't believe in. Churches in Europe were more closely associated with politics than they were in America. And churches were becoming feminized as more women attended than men.